This is a collaborative podcast by Melanie, Grier, Cale, Holmes, Manraj, Ghuttora, and Mark. Today our topic is the roots and implications of prosocial behavior theory.
The late 20th century was an era in psychology that allowed for a flourishing of ideas such as prosocial behavior theory. At mid-century, behaviorism was at the forefront of psychology and stressed empiricism along with the study of observable behaviors. However, clinical psychology was dominated by the psychoanalytic perspective, which remained true until behavior modification treatments became prominent in the 1960s. Psychoanalysis in this setting focused on unconscious impulses and how they could explain one's behavior. Treatment then assumed the individual to be naive of the drives that motivated them to action. Meanwhile, behaviorists in America brought attention to routines, drives, and other causes of observable behaviors. When the importance of these theories on learning was questioned by Skinner in the 1950s, alternate theories and perspectives in the field sprung up shortly after. As this diversity of perspectives took hold in the field of psychology, more humanistic and positive approaches were able to come to light eventually, including prosocial behavior theory. While the shift in perspectives in psychology are what gave space for prosocial behaviors to be better explored and studied, the interest originated earlier. In the mid 1960s, several similar criminal activities exhibited bystander apathy. The most infamous case was that of Kitty Genovese, who was murdered in New York while a supposed 38 neighbors looked on without calling the police. These occurrences were obviously of great concern to psychologists, and they posed many questions. If people held underlying motivations to help, why did help never come? Under what circumstances does prosocial behavior manifest? If prosocial behaviors are context dependent, how can we elicit prosocial behaviors when needed to prevent future cases similar to that of Kitty Genovese? The study of prosocial behaviors expanded in the direction of explanatory mechanisms for prosocial behavior, where two dominant perspectives emerged. Psychologists pointed to several determinants which impact whether an individual will intervene in a given situation. In general, the exploration of prosocial behaviors diverged along two pathways as more evidence emerged: evolutionary and social explanations. Evolutionary psychology explores biologically adaptive explanations for psychological mechanisms, including preferences, feelings, attitudes, and behaviors. The roots of evolutionary perspectives on prosocial behavior harken back to Charles Darwin's theory of evolution based on natural and sexual selection. This explanatory direction points to a biological foundation for prosocial behavior, suggesting that it is an ingrained trait rather than an exception to the rule. Though genetic determinants of behavior are highly implicated in its development and endurance from this perspective, environmental influences are understood as important moderating variables to evolutionary adaptation. Human behavior is not solely biologically determined. Shared genetic makeup, individual traits, social learning, and perception of the immediate social circumstances interact to form behavior. Theorizing about prosocial behavior from an evolutionary approach involves exploring how natural selection favors genes that drive prosocial behavior. Kin selection theory, originally proposed by Darwin in On the Origin of Species in 1859, and later mathematically quantified by Ronald Fisher in 1930 and John Haldane in 1932, suggests that favoring reproductive success of an organism's relatives can be a successful evolutionary strategy, even if that organism's individual fitness is decreased. English evolutionary biologist William Hamilton popularized kin selection theory and coined the term inclusive fitness theory, which offers a mechanism for the development of altruism via evolution. According to this theory, an organism's behavior will persist as a consequence of natural selection if the behavior is likely to increase their own and/or their relatives' chances of reproduction, thereby passing their genes on to the subsequent generation. If prosocial behavior increases the chances of related others reproducing, genes that promote these behaviors will be propagated through natural selection. Kin selection and inclusive fitness theories help explain altruism towards genetically related others. But why would individuals behave altruistically towards non related others? American evolutionary biologist and sociobiologist Robert Trivers responded to this question with his reciprocal altruism model in 1971, which supports the hypothesis that altruistic behavior directed at a non-related other occurs with the expectation that the altruistic behavior will be reciprocated later. This theory can be summarized in the adage, "You scratch my back and I'll scratch yours." Trivers notes that cross-species evidence of reciprocal altruism is commonly observed, citing marine cleaning symbioses, warning calls in birds, and altruistic behavior observed in humans as support for his model. Unconvinced that self-interest was at the heart of altruistic behavior, Dutch primatologist and ethologist Frans de Waal began exploring the idea that empathy evolved as the main proximate mechanism for directed altruism. Empathy can be understood as a perspective-taking cognitive action that emphasizes understanding of the other and actively adopts the other's point of view. Asking the question, does empathy channel altruism in the direction evolutionary theory would predict, de Waal separated altruism into three categories: altruistic impulse, learned altruism, and intentional altruism. Intentional altruism can further be distinguished as an intentionally selfish altruism, whereby the actor seeks to benefit themselves, or intentionally altruistic altruism, whereby the actor is aware of how one's behavior will be of help to the other and acts accordingly altruistic. Exploring this latter form of altruism, which de Waal refers to as empathetic altruism, he proposed the perception action mechanism, or PAM, as a model of empathetic responses, which allows the subject's access to the object's emotional state. Perceiving the emotional state of another individual activates shared representations, producing a matched state in the actor, which then stimulates a behavioral response, such as concern for others and active perspective taking. This form of altruism, de Waal suggests, is perhaps the strongest, deriving from high emotional investment in another's well-being, and may be particularly physiologically attributed to mirror neurons. Further proposing the Russian doll model to explain empathy, de Waal describes how higher-level cognitive functions layer upon a hardwired socio-affective mechanism, such as PAM, to create advanced forms of empathy. This is not to suggest that PAM in and of itself accounts for sympathetic concern or perspective taking, but that it motivates behavior outcomes and lays the foundation for more cognitively complex forms of empathy. According to de Waal, the dynamics of the complex empathy mechanism agree with predictions from kin selection and reciprocal altruism theories, such that it remains a well-accepted prosocial behavior theory within evolutionary psychology.
The other pathway that prosocial behavior theory developed from was through social psychology, which examined prosocial behaviors through a lens of social learning, mood, and the ability to empathize with others. These and other elements are what decided whether an individual would take prosocial actions or be a bystander in various situations. This originated with social learning theory, which was proposed in the 1950s by Julian Rotter and was a response to the behaviorist movement. This theory took on behaviorism, but instead suggested that the interaction between an individual and their environment could shape behaviors. Rotter believed that if you changed the environment or an individual's perspective, then behaviors could also be changed. He also believed this could happen at any point in the life course. A lot of social learning theorists at the time were highly critical of the behaviorist theories because they didn't consider the impact of social context on behaviors. As this became of more discussion, it eventually paved the way to consider prosocial behaviors and how they could shape individuals and how they could shape social context. These changing social contexts can be seen in the current COVID-19 pandemic, and the promotion of prosocial behaviors is as critical as ever to ensure a limited spread of the virus. Following these pioneers, in the late 1960s, David Rosenhan was one of the first to actually define prosocial behaviors as such. For him, it was about internalized norms. Individuals would act upon these without expecting any sort of return for it. Because of this, he often called prosocial behaviors donating behaviors, as an individual would give up more than they got back in return. This can be seen through the COVID-19 pandemic, where low-risk individuals still follow safety precautions to ensure the safety of other individuals, even though they don't personally benefit from it. Rosenhan seeks to explain the cause for these prosocial behaviors and suggested that mood might impact whether someone would engage in these behaviors. Rosenhan also pointed out the paradoxical nature of prosocial behaviors when he put it in the context of learning theory. He pointed out this theory states that behaviors are reinforced through reward or avoidance of punishment, but altruistic behaviors seem to reap no benefit and instead puts the individual in harm's way, and so it challenges learning theory. He pointed out that these altruistic behaviors are driven by affect, observational learning from others, and cognitive development, which encourages future prosocial behaviors. Following Rosenhan, there was a theory called the empathy altruism hypothesis. This described empathy as a central component of acting in prosocial ways. Similar to the way in which Rosenhan critiqued learning theory for ignoring altruism, the empathy altruism hypothesis challenged egoism as something involved in prosocial behaviors. Instead, it was suggested that prosocial behaviors aren't connected to any personal benefit, and so these actions are driven instead by empathy for the other individual. This brought into question where the motivations originated for taking these actions and having empathy for the other, as they were crucially socially important, again seen clearly through the current COVID-19 pandemic, where the social importance of acting prosocially impacts directly the spread of the virus. In children, it has been found that there are cultural causes, socialization, moral judgment, and cognition, which can all promote prosocial behaviors, and prosocial behaviors are an empathetic adoption of the other's feelings. This can lead to altruism when the other is in need. Since the expansion of research on prosocial behaviors, there's a continued exploration of figuring out what are the causes of these behaviors and why do they occur. This has been examined cross-culturally, developmentally, and between collectivist and individual cultures, where it's been found that collectivist cultures lead to more altruistic tendencies. While a lot of this research is still quite exploratory, there's a continued search for the explanations and understanding of prosocial behaviors, and this is still of great interest to the social psychology field today.
Prosocial behavior theory holds many great implications. Current research into prosocial behavior from both evolutionary and social psychology perspectives converge upon the theory that prosocial behavior is largely ingrained, with individual, environmental, and situational factors mediating responses. Keeping this theoretical landscape in mind, we're able to interact with prosocial behavior theory in meaningful and productive ways that benefit both the individual and the collective. There are a number of reasons regarding why we intentionally engage in prosocial behaviors. These reasons include improving our psychological and physiological well-being and helping maintain stable interpersonal and intergroup connections. Psychologically, altruism benefits the helper by providing a sense of competence and purpose, improving positive mood, experiencing increased social integration, and serving as a distraction during trying times. Adolescents who engage in prosocial behavior demonstrate increased academic functioning and report an overall increase in quality of life seen both in their physical and psychological well-being, along with their social relationships. Participating in prosocial behaviors have also been shown to help reduce everyday stress we tend to experience. Physiologically, prosocial behaviors release the hormone oxytocin, which has anxiolytic effects. The hormone oxytocin can temporarily limit the fight-or-flight response and has been shown to result in decreased social anxiety and a decreased fear of talking with strangers. Interventions that facilitate altruism in patients with coronary artery disease have resulted in an increased overall well-being and a decrease in mortality rates with fewer recurring cardiac events. The stress hormone cortisol has also been shown to decrease in those who volunteer. Current research is also looking at how prosocial behaviors can improve cooperation through trustworthiness and likeness. To increase prosocial behaviors within or among a group, it is necessary to emphasize a common group identity. This knowledge can be effectively utilized in pandemic responses. There are many future directions for prosocial behavior theory. The COVID-19 pandemic has provided a modern-day example of why facilitating and promoting prosocial interactions between individuals and groups is important. Though humanity is predisposed to acting prosocially, internal and environmental factors can disrupt this mechanism, which means that the active facilitation of prosocial behaviors in oneself and others is very valuable. Within the context of the pandemic, prosocial behavior theory is a valuable consideration. While some theorists still argue for universal human egoism, current evidence suggests that altruism is humanity's default state. Therefore, by employing strategies suggested by research, officials can approach the COVID-19 crisis reasonably by focusing on encouraging ingrained prosocial human traits to emerge and repressing self-centered tendencies. Leaders can use knowledge regarding prosocial behaviors to promote unity among citizens and offer education about the benefits of prosocial behavior. If most people are naturally inclined to help others without expectation of rewards, perhaps a hopeful outlook is warranted. As the pandemic continues, some fields like developmental psychology may use prosocial behavior theory to propose curriculum and professional practices that promote collective identity adoption, perspective taking, and altruism. Within a clinical setting, altruistic interventions that stimulate prosocial tendencies will continue to be explored as a treatment option given the psychological and physiological benefits of prosocial behavior. Prosocial behavior theory will undoubtedly continue to draw scholarly attention as the underlying mechanisms behind humanity's natural state of being remains in academic and popular discourse. Understanding self-sacrifice for others' well-being has many immediate applications regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, the inconvenience of wearing a mask in public to protect others from the viral spread makes us question why we act the way we do towards others and what type of motivations lie at the core of our instincts. Accepting that we as humans are inclined to prosociality, as the theory presently describes, can not only provide individual benefits for helpers and helpees, but offer hope and inspiration for the collective as well. By using historical knowledge and ongoing research findings, we can promote prosocial behaviors to not only better improve quality of life overall, but such as in the case of the current pandemic, save lives too.
This has been a collaborative podcast by Melanie Grier, Cale Holmes, Manraj Ghuttora, and Mark Jen.